Well, good afternoon. I'm Leon Davis, and this is Altitude Adjustment. So let's get started. Welcome to Altitude Adjustment. Well, thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. Today's show is about technology. And before we start, I want to make a note of a comment that I received last week. And one of the comments was that I was emotional, or more emotional than they know me to be. I was in radio for several years, and air check sessions were a normal part of that environment. And an air check session is where you sit down with the program director and you discuss your performance and ways to improve. As a regular part of the podcast, I review each podcast and to find ways that I can improve. While I was viewing last week's podcast, I was unable to see that there was any emotional response from myself. I am committed to removing emotion from this podcast to avoid being emotional about the decision-making process, emotional about the editorial process, or emotional about the delivery process. There was one moment in last week's podcast where I read off the names of people whose lives were affected by news agencies' behavior. Someone may see that as a playing to emotion, but it was an attempt to make real the consequences of actions by identifying the people who had actually suffered. I am committed to removing emotion from the creation and production of this podcast. In many instances in our everyday life, emotion will supersede logic and reason and end with less than optimal results. Your comments and feedback are always welcome, and I will attempt to address them in a timely manner. If you feel I have not fully addressed your issues, please contact me directly, and I will do the best that I can. So let's talk about technology. The purpose of technology was to help enhance our everyday lives, to make us more productive, to free up resources, to enhance humanity and society, and never to become the focus of society. We have cell phones, tablets, Fire Sticks, Roku. Coming soon, we'll have driving cars and domestic robots. And it appears that the more technology we incorporate into our lives, the farther apart we grow from each other. So examining the place of technology and the implementation of technology is probably going to be something that we're going to have to do directly and pretty soon. Because the further that we grow apart, the more tension that society is going to be and less civil society can become. Let's talk about some of the ways that technology has been implemented in our current lives, and some of the impacts of that. Pardon me. Such as instant replay. It was implemented to help ensure the fairness of sporting events, but it may lead to replacing referees or subjugating the referee's judgment on the field. There have been several discussions about the place of instant replay in the game, and I'm sure that discussion is going to have to get bigger and broader. Almost everywhere you go, there is some form of digital or electronic advertising. Bus stations, now they have electronic billboards where it rotates and changes as you drive down the highway. That becomes a distraction, actually. But again, it's because we've tried to limit the number of billboards for beautification of the landscape, but it also can become a distraction because it does take the driver's attention away from driving. Drone technology. Drone technology is implemented to help first responders, to identify potential dangers and structures that were damaged, or possible people that are injured and maybe need to be helped. But also drone technology now can be used to eavesdrop or spy on your neighbor. So technology, the use of technology can better our lives, but it's the implementation and the use and the societal use that's going to be the most important aspect of that. Because if we use technology properly, it is safe and efficient, and there are a lot of instances of that. Refrigerators, you might not think of that as technology, but that's what it is. As technology becomes more prevalent, we need to have probably more discussions about the implementation and consider the long-term impacts. As I mentioned, the more technology we seem to get, the further apart we seem to get. Though Facebook can contact people from great distances, and I'll share an experience. I recently had hang out with some college friends that I hadn't hung out with in 20 years, 10 years maybe, because it was at the reunion. But we don't hang out on a regular basis, but because we're Facebook friends, I'm aware of their lives and how things are going, and I think that that's great, and it actually brings us together. So they were in St. Louis recently. We hung out, had a great time. We got to talk in a way that we hadn't talked even since high school, and I felt a little that I understand that person a little better. So it can bring us together, but it appears you can draw lines to where people are now defriending people because of their political views, whereas before we argue about it, hash it out, and everybody would move on and agree to disagree. But now it's become such a it's so easy to just dismiss someone because if you don't want that in your environment, you just cut them off socially, or you cut them off through your social media. You don't have to deal with them because life has changed to the point of where we don't live all in the same, grow up and live in the same neighborhood and worked in the same neighborhood. So a lot of times friendships have to be maintained through electronic sources or through technology sources, the telephone or Facebook or Instagram, if that's what you use. So those technologies that we probably need to address and how we're using those. Right now I wanted to pick on the cell phone, and I'd like to talk about other technology that we use and how we use it, but the cell phone has impacted our society in, I think, a very profound way that maybe we don't address directly. We're trying to deal with it, and we're trying to make sure that the technology is used safely and properly, but I don't think we've had a real discussion about its implementation and use. So I'm going to talk a little bit about life before the cell phone. Before we had cell phones, companies did business, people kept up with friends and neighbors, people were able to access emergency services and other services, and life progressed and was very good. The thing was, most of the time you had to make a phone call from home, or you use a payphone, and you don't find very many of those. I don't find very many of those now, but use a payphone. And one of the aspects of that was a certain level of privacy and anonymity. A phone conversation is a conversation between two people, usually two people. Now they have, and there's technology again, now they have the ability for conference calling, and you can conference in as many people as you like, but it is a tool that helped society prosper and profit and do better. Then we used voicemail, and I can't imagine. I use voicemail. I still use voicemail. I leave a message if I don't get that person and I get their voicemail, I leave a message. There are a lot of people who just don't. You've got alternate ways to reach that person: texting, Facebooking, messaging, emo, or whatever video app that you might want to leave information on. You can leave audio messages, video messages. So there are a lot of ways to connect with someone that you want to connect with. With cell phones, though, we've changed our behavior. At one time, a phone call was considered private. It was just you and the person that you talked to. You usually kept that to yourself. You didn't, you weren't loud about it, whatever. You just talked to the person that you wanted to talk to, and you move forward. Now that we have mobile phones, we have cell phones, it appears that routine calls that we would allow to go to voicemail or to the answering machine are now necessary. They have to be taken anywhere, anytime, no matter what. I imagine most all of us have some story of trying to transact business someplace, and a person in line in front of you, or somewhere in your path, is carrying on a conversation, and usually pretty loudly, because a lot of times people don't pay attention to the volume of their voice because they're paying more attention to what they're saying and what the other person is saying to them. But it starts to impact how you're able to transact things that you're trying to transact. Now, I realize that being in public, there are certain things that you have to expect are going to happen and that you're going to have to deal with. There's no reasonable expectation that everybody's going to be quiet to a level that's going to make you comfortable or get out of your way because you're headed in some way to do something. So that's expected. That kind of interruption in public is what you'd expect. Having someone ignore social norms or ignore social graces in an attempt to enjoy or use a phone call puts a special burden on how to respond to that person. And it appears that people's living room now is wherever their cell phone is. That cell phone has become a central focus of their public life. They're out in public, they're listening to music on their cell phone, they're looking at pictures, they're maybe taking selfies or whatever, they're having conversations, and they seem so absorbed in themselves that they ignore the people around them and any obligation that they may have in public, because they're doing what they prefer to do. I hesitate to guess why people are doing that. For every person, there's going to be a different explanation as to why that's important to have that call or play that game or whatever it is that they're doing. And The difficulty is as in public, how do you communicate to that person that they're infringing upon your trying to accomplish what you need to accomplish? How do we in society assist each other in moving about through public and allow that person to move beyond you if you are preoccupied with something else, so that they can transact the business that they need to transact and you can transact the business that you need to transact? And part of the social contract, and I say social contract, is a contract of how we perform in public so as not to impose upon someone else our desires, so that everybody is able to accomplish what they need to accomplish in a rational and reasonable way. One of the things I'd like to point out to people who tend to use the cell phone in a car while they're driving especially is there are countless articles about distracted driving. We know that, trying to eat a burger and fries while you're tooling down the highway is a bad thing, but you see people do it all the time. There's this, I guess, thought that it's not going to happen to me until it does, and you may go years of eating burgers behind the wheel or doing other things behind the wheel that distract from your driving without having an accident. The difficulty with that is that it only takes one time for that to happen, and then it's an extreme problem. So now one of the things that I think is important for people to consider is that young drivers watch what you do. Teenagers, 10-year-olds, 14-year-olds, 16-year-olds, they watch what you do. You may have been driving for a number of years and you have quite a bit of experience and you feel comfortable that you can maneuver your vehicle while using the cell phone or talking on the phone, and it will not be a problem. But younger people who see you don't equate your years of experience of driving, and they presume that if you can do it, they can do it. They can be just as good at achieving what you're doing with as minimal effort as you do. But what we know is that they don't have those years of experience. So when you drive and you're on the phone and there are young people watching you, you are creating an environment where they're going to mimic you. They're going to believe that they can do what you can do, and in a lot of cases they're going to believe that they can do it better than you. And a lot of times I think we believe that if we tell them that it's a bad thing, that somehow they will recognize that, when we as adults have been told that driving distracted is a bad thing, and yet we do it. So that is something to consider. As if driving while on the phone wasn't bad enough, we now have walking while on the phone. I saw a news article the other day. They're considering laws about keeping people from walking while distracted. We're an intelligent people. We've achieved great things, and yet we do some things that are so obviously not our best moment that I question, how do we get to that point? How do we believe that walking down the street and not paying any attention? So we've got a distracted driver and a distracted walker. What can go wrong there? What phone call do you absolutely have to take that you can't pay attention to the environment around you? Before we had the cell phone, we had home phones, and every call you got, you could handle at home. Did that change because of the cell phone? Now that it became too important to miss that phone call? Did the quality of phone calls or the change because of the cell phone? Or are we just ignoring intelligent behavior because we can? Because you can do something doesn't mean you always should do something. If you try to have that discussion with someone, I think we all know what happens. You don't have that discussion because you want to stop someone from enjoying their life. You don't have that discussion with someone because you don't want them to be able to do things that make their lives better. That's the whole point of going to work every day and doing your job, is that you try to make sure that other people around you are able to have a better life as well as you. So when we have that discussion, or when you try to have that discussion with someone, the intent is to make the situation safer for everyone. If you have that accident because you're on the phone, it cannot be undone. Because if you stay off the phone, does that mean you will never have an accident? Absolutely not. But if you have that accident and you're on the phone, and I hate to even think that you might be texting, because there's just absolutely no way to text without looking at your phone, without having one or two hands off the steering wheel looking at the phone. There's just no way to do it, as far as I know. But if someone gets hurt, you can't undo that. I'm sorry won't change it. I didn't mean to won't change it. It's just happened. And the importance of that phone call won't matter. Maybe sometimes we think, if I don't take this phone call, it's going to be someone in my family that's sick or hurt and they need me. We've had that situation before we had cell phones. And we were able to function, and we were able to accomplish what we needed to accomplish. If you tell the people that you love every day, you love them every day, maybe you don't have to answer that phone while you're driving. One of the things that I encourage people to do is, if you need to make that phone call, first off, think about where you're going, what phone calls you need to make. Make them before you leave. Make them before you start off on your journey. That way you won't have to make them during your journey. If you find you absolutely have to make a phone call in the middle of your journey, pull over. Make the phone call short because you're trying to get where you're trying to go. Make that call, transact business, get back on the road. There's usually some place that you can pull over to accomplish that. Is that worth it for the potential of the harm that can be done? And I think that's something you're going to have to determine. I guess you have determined it if you've decided to drive with your cell phone, drive using your cell phone. So with distracted walking, I don't know. We've pushed entertainment to the point of where it is necessary 24 hours a day, or at least as long as we're in public, and we have to be entertained just going about doing the things that we need to do. Okay, I guess if that's where you think you need to be, just consider all of the things that go along with that, how that impacts just the people around you trying to go about their daily lives, and maybe run out, get some medications or whatever, and then just get home, and their trip is made longer because there are people who are not engaged in just moving about getting done what they want to do. So that's one of, I would like to hear from someone that believes that making the phone call in the car or being distracted walking is an effective use of technology. Because I can't find it I can't find the logic and reason that makes that acceptable. So I'm admitting here that I don't know. I have no idea what would make that a useful and productive way to go about life. So I would love to hear from somebody that can help me understand that mindset. What do they get done? What do you get done? What do you accomplish in that time? A phone conversation, and I'm gonna end on this. Phone conversation has always been about one person talking to another to resolve, to whatever. In public, we have a tendency to make other parties involved in our phone call because it may be we're loud, and again we're distracted, so we're not probably performing as well as we can. And yes, you have certain rights and privileges in society just as everybody else does. And so why do we push our fellow citizens to want to have laws governing behavior that we should just volunteer to curtail, simply because it's the right thing to do? Give me your feedback on that. Give me your take on that. If I'm missing something, help me understand that. Help me see that. Because I admit I'm I have limited scope of things that I am gonna go to, rely on. So expanding my knowledge is one of the things that I like to do. So help me understand that. I'm going to conclude this week's episode. Let's see what I've got here. The goal of the podcast, I don't know if I've mentioned this before, is to be advertiser supported. If you can find that out on my website. Until that point, your direct support will help the podcast survive. If you would like ways that you can help financially support Altitude Adjustment, please visit the website. And I look forward to speaking with you. Remember that the podcast is available for replay on YouTube. The audio podcast is available on Stitcher.com, Podcast.com, SoundCloud.com, the iTunes Store, and the Google Music Play Store. The internet is powered by your likes, shares, and comments. Please like, share, and comment on this video, on this episode, and when you consider leaving a comment, because it does matter. As always, be cool, be calm, and above all, be careful. Look out for the other guy, because they may not be looking out for you.